Matthew, thank you so much for joining us.
Amazing to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me along.
So let's start this interview with a discussion around your approach to crypto regulation, because I think, you know, the approach itself has a lot of dynamics and a lot of aspects that affect how entities work around it. So just walk us through your approach to regulatory and put a regulation to virtual assets.
Yeah. Okay. So look, the approach that we've taken really reflects the vision that was set out for VARA at the beginning, and it needs to be reflective of the sort of dynamic nature of the industry and its innovative spirit, if you like. So we started with a few fundamental principles when we looked at this. One was that we wanted this to be principles-based. So we have enough flexibility in the application of the regulation so that the VASPs can have some sort of flexibility in how they decide to comply with that without being tied down to very, very specific principles. And that also allowed us to be proportional to risk as well. So these are risk-based regulations as opposed to a very long list of, you know, prescriptive stuff that people need to comply with. So that was number one. Number two, which I think is really, really important to highlight, is they're technology neutral. So we decided on an activity-based regime, not a product-based regime. And the main reason for that was the technology moves so fast in a very, very short space of time that we felt it would be, you know, impossible to keep up with all of those changes, and we'd be making changes to regulations, you know, every couple of months. So we went down the activity-based regime, and by that I mean, you know, if you're an exchange, you're regulated as an exchange. If you're a custodian, you're regulated as a custodian, you know, and so on. But the other important part of the philosophy, which I really like, really resonates with me, is that we've got this continuous learning part to how we operate. So we've come into this as VARA with an intent to engage with the industry as we go through this. So all of our regulations were built with consultation, with you know, a keenness to understand the industry's challenges with this, and as a consequence built from the ground up. And we continue that kind of learning journey. We're learners at heart, you know, I think is the best way of putting it. So that philosophy is built all the way through. But the other important piece to remember is we can't compromise on our federal and international standards when it comes to compliance, when it comes to consumer protection, you know, in particular. And so we've built a very, very strong, robust licensing and supervision framework that underpins all of this, and you know, allows us to maintain those standards, but also maintain that flexibility with the regulation and with the VAS as we go through this journey.
And Matt, can you share maybe with us, like, what has been the response of the crypto community, for example, from the firms that have been coming to Dubai, and how do you see this evolving over the next couple of years?
Yeah. So, well, as you know, the crypto community is very vocal. They like to give feedback, so if you give them the opportunity to give feedback, they'll do that, and they've certainly done that over the last couple of years. We hold industry forums. There are crypto organisations within Dubai and the UAE that help us, you know, gather that feedback, and I don't really see that changing. I think what it will enable us to do is not necessarily get ahead, but we will be able to preempt some of the really important challenges that the industry is facing and try and either enable those through regulation or figure out what other parts of the UAE government that we need to work with in order to, you know, make these things happen. You know, all considering risk, of course. We're not going to do things that introduce risk to the system, but where an idea is good, it makes sense, and it's going to enable that ecosystem, then we're absolutely willing to hear about that.
Let us just a little bit discuss, when you come up with a new framework, regulatory framework, do you usually coordinate with other institutions like the central bank, the Ministry of Finance? Or what kind of collaboration do you have with other government entities?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really, really important. And it's really important because we are a niche regulator that is explicitly focused on virtual assets. But virtual assets as businesses touch other parts of the ecosystem as well, particularly finance and banking. And so what we did over the last 2.5 years is establish and work with the central bank, work with the likes of ESCA, to make sure that we have a minimum baseline, make sure that we are compliant with all of the central bank work that's been done on anti-money laundering, and make sure that we're helping to educate, their stakeholders, their LFIs, their entities as to what we're doing and how we're mitigating risk as well. So it's very, very important, and something that we've done over the last 2 years. It's one of the top priorities that we have.
And you mentioned the cooperation with some of the other UAE bodies, but obviously VARA is the world's first crypto regulator.
Yeah.
What has been kind of the reaction of your peers at a global level, and what kind of do you believe there'll be other jurisdictions that will follow the Dubai model with having a crypto-specific regulator?
I don't know about the last part, but there has been a lot of interest from international regulators in our approach and how we've tackled some of the unique problems of the industry, things like the travel rule, for example. So we've actually had dialogues with a lot of the major international regulators for them really just to understand, similar questions to what you just asked. How did you build this? What principles did you use? How do you stay ahead of the curve when it comes to this technology? And also, really, really importantly, when you look at the nature of the technology being borderless, we have to think about how we work with these jurisdictions to be able to enable cross-border enforcement if we ever need to. So we're in the process of building those kind of international relationships at the moment. But I would say most are very, very interested in how we've gone about that, given the unique nature of it, given it being a unique niche regulator for virtual assets.
So Matthew, compliance can be costly, especially for smaller entities, not the big players. So how can you reduce the compliance costs? And you have a strategy when it comes to this?
Oh, we do actually. It's one of the things that in the Dubai context we have a unique vantage point of, and I'll explain why. Because of the interest that we've garnered from the industry, we've got a very, very wide spectrum of participants that want to be part of this ecosystem, ranging from the largest, more established VASPs, right the way down to the smaller, more innovative ones. And we've established this very, very strong baseline, but the way I've described it in the past is this, for me, that's not enough. The costs of compliance for some entities, and not just the cost, but the availability of talent to do these things, the knowledge required to run a crypto compliance function is just not there in the market at the moment. So I would say two things to answer your question. One is we're looking at building out a hosting regime, which will allow larger entities to act as hosts for things like compliance infrastructure for these smaller entities, and therefore reduce the cost. But we're also looking at building out education programs for compliance officers and money laundering and reporting officers where we will work with educational institutions to provide that level of education to the market and hopefully reduce that burden.
It's a very interesting discussion, Matthew. More to come with Matthew White, VARA CEO, right after this break.
Phoenix Group, UAE.
We're back here with Matthew White, the CEO of the Virtual Assets Regulatory Authority, VARA, the world's first crypto regulator. Matthew, you just discussed the cost of compliance for a lot of the crypto firms that are being licensed with VARA. How do you deal with the people cost? Obviously, running a regulator, you need to hire people as well. How do you find as a regulator hiring people with experience in crypto or compliance? And how do you see this change over the next couple of years?
It's probably the thing I've spent the most on, actually, since I was appointed as the CEO. We've always had good people at VARA, but when you look at the challenges we've got, we're building something very, very new, very, very complex. And so it's really, really important to have that, as you said, world-class capability. And I think there's probably two dimensions to that. One is this TradFi versus virtual assets dimension. And we need both, right? As you'll know, a lot of the concepts, a lot of the legacy concepts around compliance really come from TradFi. And what we've also then done is to augment that with this technology. So it's really, really important for us to have TradFi experience and virtual assets experience. And what we've done about that, it is very hard to find talent. So we are anchoring that with a few really, really key hires. We've got hires from very significant investment banks. We've got hires from European regulators. But we're sort of supplementing that with talent from the industry as well, where we can. But that leads me on to the second dimension, which is this global versus local challenge as well. So it's not just about the nature of the experience, it's about, well, where do we get that experience from? And we absolutely need global talent because we need to be able to engage on the terms of these other organisations. But we need to make this sustainable for Dubai as well. And so we need that local talent in place to look beyond the next kind of 2 years and grow our business into something very, very sustainable. And that, to find a young graduate that has virtual assets compliance experience, it's just not possible. So we're building out those training programs using the expertise at a higher level to train and grow the next generation of talent, which will then become our sustainable vision for VARA in the future.
So Matthew, let me ask you a follow-up on Henry's question here. So when you build the framework for regulations around crypto here in the UAE, to what extent do you have to align it with what's happening internationally as well? I know that each country has its own vision and its own fundamentals when it comes to regulations, but at the same time, to what extent there should be some kind of alignment with what is happening globally by other governments?
Yeah. So look, there's absolutely different risk appetites depending on the nation or the country that you're talking about, and that drives a lot of the debate around what regulations are set up and where. But there are fundamental international standards like FATF that we have to comply with and that we set out to comply with at the beginning, and we don't compromise on those. So our regulations have been built with standards like FATF in mind, but also international standards around things like cryptography and technology and cybersecurity. All of that has come from an international base which already exists, and then the kind of crypto virtual asset specific policy decisions we've been able to make locally. So it's a balance between the two.
And what message do you have, for example, for all the crypto companies and crypto firms that may be listening to the show, and if they're thinking about Dubai, what would be your message to them?
Well, look, I think Dubai is a very, very good place to be as a virtual assets business. But it's not just about VARA, right? If you look at Dubai as a place to exist as a business, just by virtue of the D33 economic agenda, which as you know, which aims to make this one of the top 3 cities to invest, work, and live in. That business environment itself is a cornerstone of what makes it great to be a business here. But when you layer on VARA as a catalyst to virtual assets, and we give that clarity and that certainty and that robustness of regulation, I think that package together really makes Dubai a fantastic place for a virtual asset business to come, set up, get investment, and operate with, as I said, certainty and clarity, with that sustainable vision into the long term.
So when you look at institutional investors versus retail investors in crypto and in virtual assets overall, to what extent do you think that each has their unique regulatory requirements? I mean, do they look at certain factors that are different from each other depending on their investment goals?
Yeah, absolutely. So they're both very, very different investor classes, and we separate that in our regulations. Actually, we have different requirements for institutional, what we call qualified retail, and what we call retail investors, and we look at the different risks associated with each type, in that regulation. And you look at institutional investors, they're coming in. They have capital. They want to deploy that into the crypto space. They want access to things like derivative products. So we're looking at how we enable those institutions to operate in that context. Retail investors are really, really interested in crypto, not just as a sort of, not really as a speculative asset. I mean, this provides solutions to cross-border transfers and all sorts of other types of problems that they face. But the big issue there is consumer protection. And how do you make sure that we're not exposing retail investors that don't have the knowledge of these products to unnecessary risks? So we take there are a lot of similarities, but there are some subtle differences in terms of how we look at the risks and how we deal with that from a regulatory perspective as well.
Which brings me, I guess, to my final question is obviously on a personal level, right? You were, I think we learned earlier today you're an aerospace engineer by background. Obviously, space is becoming a big topic right now. You're a partner at PwC for many years, and now obviously you're in a position that very few people in their career have the opportunity to be, which is CEO of a regulatory body. What has surprised you the most, or you were surprised to see when you took the role of leading a regulatory body that you didn't expect when you were on the other side?
I suppose that wasn't just at the time I took the role. I think it's been over the last 2 years of working with VARA. And one of the things, when I first encountered VARA was, you know, a bunch of very, very smart people with this fantastic idea to create the world's first independent regulator. And it was that kind of ambition and that drive and that you know, consistency around the idea of doing this that really kind of attracted me to wanting to be part of VARA. And that's really what struck me, I think. That's really what's exciting about this. I feel very energized by ultimately the leadership and you know, the vision that they've brought to this. And I'm very, very proud to be here. I think this is you know, easily the most exciting thing that I've done in my career to date, anyway. And I'm relatively young.
More exciting than space. That's one thing. Here we go.
We wish you the best of luck. Thank you so much for joining us in Crypto Weekly. Matthew White, VARA CEO. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.